Mr. Frencel Gillion, welcome again to our journey of exploring the growth illusion. After our last discussion, I've spent time with the notes. Obviously, that particular episode is now up on YouTube. Love people to go and recap.
Yeah.
We had a really, to me, intensely interesting discussion. And if I go back to our first discussion, we've spoken frequently about the three paths that any founder basically is going to be on. And the three paths are obviously grow to exit, grow to manage, grow, build, and then your final path is sort of build by default or grow by default.
Yes.
and we have that lack of discipline. And one of the things that the two main themes that have come up so strongly is the need for discipline, and the need for humility on the part of the founder to acknowledge where they are. And another thing, reading chapter 4 and chapter 5, and I was spending time with chapter 5 earlier this morning, and how important it is to have the vision early on about what and why you're building it. And this is when we get to chapter 5, that's something we're going to explore deeply. But last time we spoke specifically about the courier guide journey. Today, if we start talking about chapter 5, when we get there, we're going to talk about two very different case studies that we have alluded to. Twizzler is the one. And then the other one was the
it was Jetro, also cashing.
That was it. All of this is great discussing around these central themes, but what we're going to delve into today is some hard discipline, because that is such an important part of what you write about, is the need for discipline, planning. We spoke about the strategic disciplines, and you look at 6 strategic disciplines in the book. Would you like to take us through those one by one? We can maybe stop halfway through and dissect one of them, but I'd like you just to go through, because they are foundational as part of a value building exercise.
Okay. No, thanks so much. And as you say, chapter 5 talks more specifically about types of growth. This section, chapter 3, 4, and 5, I've called in the book the engine of growth, whereas the part 1, where we spoke about the courier guy and also the founder, I call that the founder's constraint, where I positioned, the fact that there are different ways of growing. So one of the points I made earlier on is about, different types of discipline, economic discipline, strategic discipline, and so on, governance discipline. So when it comes to strategic discipline, I try to make the book also relatable. As I mentioned, there are examples in the book. And then also I came from the perspective that the reader would already have had exposure to other books on strategy. So in my reading, in my writing, obviously then also referenced other books where I also looked at other books on strategy and the likes. So I didn't want to rehash again talking about, vision, mission, and, that kind of thing, but really try to distill it into a couple of areas where the reader can then use and take away. And then also the book has a strategy diagnostic where you can take these 6 items, which I'll talk to now, and you can actually assess, okay, item 1, how am I doing? And how mature is my strategy process? So the first one we spoke about the last time as well, is basically operating in reality. And here, if you look at, let's call it MBA books, you will have frameworks like Pestelek, where it talks about, the political, economic, and the social technology and so on. So I didn't use that language in the book. I merely said, look, if you're operating in any business, you obviously have, you're operating in a competitive environment, right? You have other businesses that are at your level or maybe larger, have advantages that you may not have, or you may be relatively have other competitive advantages. So understanding the competition, understanding how you stack up is important. Understanding what's happening in the industry is important. Understanding, global factors. We're living in an interconnected world. So, if one talks about what's happening geopolitically, with the conflict in the Middle East and so on, how does that impact my supply chain? How does it impact my input cost? So in South Africa itself, what are the legislative environment impact that it's going to be impacting on your business? So that's the first thing. And the reason why I also mentioned that is, when I was in corporate, I have had instances where working alongside a founder, when, it comes to strategy setting, in the one instance I remember, the idea was to go off site. And then in that particular instance, the idea was also to involve a lot of people that are not even connected with the business. Granted, it might have been an unusual situation. But in that instance, the strategy session almost looked like a beauty parade. You're getting a lot of people and you can now tell them how great this business is. And that's not a useful thing to do. What you really should be looking at is critically look at your external environment, and whatever decisions you make at the strategy setting session, those should be based on certain deltas, certain levers in your business that can take the business forward. And how do you know that? By looking at both your external environment and then your internal environment, which is the next point. The next point is then build internal capacity. So firstly, I say look at the market reality. The second one is then building internal capacity. And what the book does, it follows an arc throughout the book where some of the concepts are introduced initially, and then it goes further and expounds on that. So one of the areas that I discuss in the book is on leadership and talent. And there I talk about the leadership of the founder and also talent acquisition, retention, and so on. So that's part of what I call building internal capacity. So having the right human capability in the business is part of what I call internal capacity. So you've looked at the external environment, you've seen what the rules of engagement are, as some people will talk about critical success factors and key success factors. So the factors that are important for you to be in the game, and the fact in terms of the industry, and the factors that sets you apart, right? So what are the critical and what are the key success factors? So those forms part and parcel for me of building internal capacity. Some people would use tools like a SWOT analysis. That's also useful. I don't necessarily mention it in the book, but the idea is that, what are the things that you need to do well? This could also be systems and processes. What systems and processes do I need in my business to be able to compete? What are the gaps that I have competitively to compete? Then the third one that I talk about is what I call target available market, right? So I say that you can have you can understand the external environment, you can build capacity, but the capacity that you build is really for the purpose of it's for the purpose of winning. So the idea is these 6 factors should put you in a situation where you build long-term growth, give you a winning position. So The third factor, and this is now where I get to add examples, is about building a valuable market. Now, here I mentioned two examples, and we can go through them. So the first one is a company called M-Pesa, which is in Kenya. And I pick up the M-Pesa story again in chapter 4 when we talk about business model. But why I mentioned M-Pesa is that, it started off as a simple, I think they were looking to do small loans um, between, consumer loans. And eventually the business model morphed into payments, because what happened is that people were using the platform not necessarily to get a loan from M-Pesa, but they were using the platform to give loans between one another, payments between one another, should I say. In other words, people were sending money as opposed to getting a loan from M-Pesa. They were using the platform to send money to other people. And then from there, it morphed into a payment platform and so on, and also regional expansion. So now suddenly the market is not only Kenya, it's a broader market, Africa market with multiple products. And now you can scale, right? You can have a model that has operating leverage. Once the fixed cost is met, it begins to leverage. The other one that I also mentioned under target a variable market is Curro. So I mentioned, and I'll maybe stop after this and we can go through the other aspects. But so the next one that I mentioned under target of variable market is Curro. So Curro, I came across as I was finalizing the book. I think there was a story about PSG, delisting Curro and creating a fund for, philanthropy and so on. I forget the whole story, but effectively, what triggered me about Curro is their business model. So what they did is, again, a founder-led business, someone who was a teacher before started this business, and he saw a gap in the market. And the gap was this, that if we look at South Africa, we have a challenge when it comes to education. A large, much of the population is young and in need of sound education. In some ways, there's a lot of challenges in the education system. And so the public sector, a lot of people are not necessarily, satisfied with the quality of service that they're getting from the public sector schooling. On this other side is many people can't, or most people can't afford the high-end private education, because obviously you're talking about significant amounts of money per annum. And so what they were looking at is an affordable, high quality. So it's not dumbing down the product, but finding a more efficient way to deliver effectively a good quality education, and a holistic development of the individual, sports, extramural activities. And they were able to, identify this market and actually build a business over the last 20 years or so, where campuses all over South Africa, because the market is big enough. And my point with these points, and particularly this last one, is that, you will have to make those strategic decisions. If your market is not going to allow you to build this valuable business, maybe you need to pivot to another market, or you need to, get into adjacent markets like M-Pesa. But the size of the opportunity, if you look at any of these major technology companies, or, major listed companies, you obviously have to firstly identify a market that is big enough for you to create value in.
So I'm going to pick up on a little case study that you brought up there, which was M-Pesa, which I'd actually forgotten about. And the book creates, in an unskilled reader possibly, the perception that this book is written for the time before technological disruption like artificial intelligence. The principles in this book were great up
Yeah.
until now, but the rate of change has now picked up. That doesn't work anymore. So the perception may be created that the relevance of a book like this
Yeah.
becomes debatable in a new technological age.
Yeah.
From my own experience, I know that one of the systemic features of a operating system
Yeah.
is solid communication channels that operate open in both directions, that allow unbottlenecked, to use a really bastardized term, but allow unbottlenecked information flow and rapid decision making,
Yeah.
despite the need for a certain amount of structure in decision making. Those structures are now actually scalable with the use of technology. As I've been reading through the book, and particularly with our own journey and the
Yeah.
speed with which we are needing to react to market conditions, not just market conditions, but completely disruptive um, competition practices,
Yeah.
projects that we have been working on for 6 months that are complete start losing relevance unless they are allowed the flexibility to pivot. And some of our products, actually most of our products, are technology based. And one of the things that we do with our developers now is we say, you need to build in flexibility at this node, this node, this node, and we run what if scenarios.
Yeah.
What if we are beaten to launch by someone that we didn't see coming? How do we cope with that eventuality? So the scenario planning becomes important and needs to be built into the infrastructure. So I've already answered the question to a large extent, but I would like your comment. If one looks at these strategic disciplines and looks at it as you have, as an holistic thing, not an MBA course outline,
No.
and quite frankly, anyone that still believes that you need to go to university and follow a certain course the way it was structured even 5 years ago, you need to think very carefully about that investment, because many of the careers that existed 2 or 3 years ago have already been done away with.
Yeah.
And one needs to be able to adapt knowledge and build transferable skills. And this is a discussion for another day, but the educational structure and system as it is no longer fit for purpose as a legacy institution. The likes of Curro, who are more agile, adaptable, if they are able to move fast enough, I think will continue to survive. But I think the legacy institutions will have to rely on heavy marketing. I'm on the Harvard mailing list, and I've attended a couple of their webinars, and I am completely underwhelmed because they are normally at least 6 months and normally a year behind current educational trends on decentralized learning platforms. So that's another matter entirely. What I'd like us to maybe explore now is just this. We're talking about the 5 strategic disciplines and how important they are. What is your response when someone says, okay, Frencel, great, that worked 10 years ago?
Mm.
Is it?
Yeah, so I think it's a very important point. And as I wrote this book, I actually obviously made I made some strategic decisions, because the one way I could have gone with the book was to talk about technology. And I purposely tried to not make this book about scaling tech companies. That was a conscious decision. So if you go to and try to look at timeless principles, which I'll come back now. So, but if you look at chapter four does lend does pivot a little bit more to technology companies. So I discuss business model evolution, and there I talk about Ula, which is an Indonesian e-commerce platform, and how it kind of ran ahead of itself and so on. I mentioned Uber that expanded and thought they had some operating leverage, but actually subsidizing drivers and riders. So and still not profitable. And then I bring in a company like Yappy Chef, who actually re integrated backwards, if you like, from online to the bricks and mortar. So I am sensitive to that. I did talk about that. The challenge is that, like you said, knowledge decays quicker. And so if one wanted to write a book or take a position on growth, you needed to then look at timeless principles, which is why I also didn't really talk about MBA type language. So one of the things I talk about is building a scalable model. That the importance of growing into this business that could be valuable for investors and could be sellable, you have to have a scalable business model. Now, that business model could be technology driven, or it could be more of a bricks and mortar model. Now, in the case of Curro, what they've done is they've got more of an asset heavy model. So they started with more of an asset heavy model where they obviously physically built the schools. And there's a number of lessons there, which I think is, cuts across. Uh, Often one can think that the idea should be more to have an asset light model that is technology heavy, and you invest in technology, and then once you've made the investment, you have these network effects, which is a lot of people talk about as well. If you look at some of the platforms that they have network effects, the more people on the network, the more valuable it becomes. Now, if you look at an old economy, if you want to put it that way, business, you mentioned the Harvards. In this instance, what they've done very well was that they control their cost. So whenever they time their expansion. So remember speaking now about the fourth element of the 6 elements, which is building a scalable, or the fifth element, should I say, building a scalable business model. So they've done a couple of things. The one is whenever they build a school, they have done it with such discipline. They didn't have cost overruns, and they also paced the growth of their students such that they didn't run ahead of themselves too much. And I think that's a skill, to stay on cost, because obviously if you run over the cost, your profitability is going to suffer. So that's the one thing. The other thing what they also did is, once they now had a community, they then branched into an online service. So now you can have online only, or you can have a hybrid, where some of the services are provided online. So it's not to say that they were technology agnostic. They did even in the delivery, in the physical classroom environment, a lot of use of technology. Um, And then also online schooling, where it's purely technology that they're using in terms of the delivery, people logging in, and then also how it's the lessons are delivered. So it does talk to that. Then one of the other points I make in the 6 elements is a value proposition. Now, again, for me, that cuts across whether you Uber or M-Pesa, that's more of a technology platform. It's the value. What value are you delivering to your customers? Are you delivering it at the right price point? Can that value proposition be scaled, and so on? So that's what I try to do, because I think if you start talking specifically about technologies, by the time the book comes out, you will probably have some other technologies already. So that's how I looked at it. So some key examples I used were two, let me call it old economy businesses, the cash and carry business and also the beverage business. But then there are other examples that are purely technology plays. And you can see the example, how that then fits into this book.
For example, M-Pesa is one of those
Yeah,
case in points. And I
yeah,
think what M-Pesa demonstrated and using it in the framework of the book is how that agility was a feature of a well-designed system.
yeah,
I think that comes across really strongly. So my personal perception is that both this book as well as your previous book, Wisdom That Builds, are going to become evergreens. And if I look, a book that I still use and give to anyone that I go into a coaching relationship with is Peter Drucker's The Effective Executive, written in the 70s. It is still as relevant then, or as it's as relevant now as it is or was back then, for the same reasons. It's evergreen, it's principles. And I
yeah,
think that is a warning to, I think, many founders
yeah,
that haven't yet reached that mid-market, but that are now starting out. Don't get too hung up on the product. Get hung up on the value proposition
yes,
that the market is going to reward you for delivering. And the product that you deliver may change its shape and form, like in the case of M-Pesa. But if you have the right infrastructure, the right systems, the leadership depth,
yeah,
the information systems, the communication systems,
yeah,
the human capability partnerships, that is going to determine whether you make it or not. What I would like to do briefly is just look at the 6 value factors that you outline. And that term that I've just used, the
yeah,
human capability partnerships, is often one that is underestimated, particularly in this time of AI, where AI is seen as a cost saving
yeah,
tool by many businesses. For us, our incorporation of AI into our workflow has enabled us to scale our value proposition, not cut our costs. So what we have used it, and we are using AI as, is a leverage tool to amplify current capacity. And
yeah,
actually, since we have started integrating AI and we've built our own database, we're not using just the database that's out there. We've built our own database over the last now 14, 15 months. We're able to bring in new strategic human capability partnerships, and leverage that we are getting is phenomenal. It is
yeah.
exponential. So would you like to talk about those 6 value factors, we are now running towards the end of our discussion. So I'm going to say we're going to keep it relatively short. So go over them. We might explore more in depth and group that with our business model evolution
Yeah.
discussion, which we're
All
going to
right.
have in the next session. But
Okay. Sorry
go
to
through those
interrupt
for
you
us.
there. So as I mentioned, it's just to recap. So we spoke about the external environment. So that's number one. Understand operating in market reality. So then the next one is internal capacity, building internal capacity. Number three is defining or operating in a valuable market. Number four is having a clear value proposition. Number five is building a scalable business model. And then number six is leveraging key strategic, inflection points. So, so if I look at two areas, the one area being building internal capacity, that's again where the human capital comes in. It could also have an impact on the value proposition because obviously as you interface with your customer, you need the right capability. So part of your value proposition might be to have competent people that can engage with your client in the right way that they need to do so, depending on what industry you are in. And then also when I talk to the last point, which is what I mean there by is I called it act on high impact strategic inflection points. A little bit wordy, but what I mean is that in any business, there are points, there are, inflection points. There are times when certain decisions has to be made. So maybe you're considering going into a new market. That's not something you consider every day. You consider buying into another company, an acquisition, considering a merger, considering raising capital. So those are key points which could make or break a business. One of the other areas is also bringing in leadership. So as the business grows, if the founder now maybe takes on a CEO role and he now builds out a key team or an executive team. So I categorize bringing in senior leadership also as these key inflection points, because making the wrong call on a key executive can also destabilize the team. So let's say you decide on a CFO, making the right call, both in terms of competence, but also in terms of, being able to carry the vision forward, being able to work with the rest of the team. Those are examples of key decisions that you need to make. Then I also have a whole chapter where I talk about what I call leadership and talent. This is talking about the founder as a leader, and there are areas, I unpack some of my thoughts on leadership as it relates to founder-led businesses. And then I also talk about, bringing talent. Now, this whole aspect of AI might be in flux. Some people say, might have the view that you can do a lot with AI. You don't need, human capability. My wife would tell me that she's got a few agents that she's programmed to help her with her digital asset management side, and these agents can do the work, and then she'll just check up on them. But I still maintain that you can use AI to become more efficient. I use AI a lot in my business. You can use AI for research, for maybe preparing documents, preparing proposals, and so on and so forth. But you still need that human capability to take your business forward, to give you that edge. And so there will definitely be an impact, So I think the challenge is for people in the workplace to get better, to become more, to have maybe a higher level of skills. So maybe, your sort of more intermediate tasks can be done by AI. But at the same time, I still believe that, what's going to separate one organization from the other is the capability of their people. You spoke earlier about the fact that, things are more fluid, things, knowledge decays faster. Businesses have to pivot quicker, have to respond quicker. And that talks to the ability of the leadership to thrive under stress, to thrive under difficult conditions. And how do you do that? You can have the executive team carry the vision by themselves, but that's unlikely to be successful. So the leadership competencies is going to be it's going to place even a bigger focus on strong leaders that are able to connect with on a human level with their teams, to bring a team along. So to be kind of a stabilizing factor, if you like, amidst this uncertainty, right? So I don't see AI replacing every kind of human capability. I see it putting more pressure on in some ways on teams and individuals to get better at what they do, more specialized, higher, kind of the human side of your value proposition, things that AI can't do. I mean, I saw a study. I don't know who did the study, but interestingly enough, they rated which jobs are most, uh, you know, um, at risk for AI, and they rated things like accountants and some aspects even lawyers and so on. So a lot of the work that can be understood, that are kind of word driven and so on. And then there's rated jobs that are not so much affected. And interestingly enough, they had sommeliers there. Guys produce wines and taste wine and so forth. AI is unable
I'm
to do
glad.
that.
I'm really glad because
So,
it's subjective.
so the point reason I mentioned that is just to give you an example. I mean, it's something that you probably wouldn't have thought about. That, something like that. And then also, AI also gets into coaching. A lot of coaching can be done by AI because you can have um, let me call it the P element of coaching, the positive psychology element. But then again, if you are specialist in coaching, you're focusing on one particular area, maybe business, you're helping companies, develop value and be able to sell their businesses. It's going to be a little bit more complicated because every situation is different and you get into judgment. So I think it's going to place more focus on the judgment, the ability to take information and make a good judgment call. That's how I see it.
And if I can just use that as a segue into, I think, a point we're going to wrap on,
Yeah,
because I see our time is running, and it's great. I love these conversations.
sure.
You and I both operate in very different market segments, and
Mm,
one of the things is business coaching. And you particularly serve this mid-market
mm,
and particularly the founder-led businesses that are wanting to transition
yeah,
and build value, retain value. That is where you fit in. And those inflection points that businesses hit, that founders hit,
mm,
the danger of hitting one of those inflection points and not having the right mirror,
yeah,
not having the person that'll hold the mirror and say, this is where you are and who you really are. This is an accurate depiction of you and where you are with the perspective of non-involvement. It gives one a depth of thinking and insight that one will not find within your organization. And there is a good reason for the fact that we, with our projects, even though we are using AI as a tool, when we create a draft proposal or a draft project or a draft product, we take that to a point with the agents that we are using,
yeah,
and we then hand it to non-involved people whose opinion we respect, and we say, here is the concept that we have worked on. What do you think? So that we have people who are not emotionally involved and attached to that project. And that is one of the things that an external business coach in particular brings to the table. That is a value proposition that cannot, at this stage, be serviced by AI. And we use AI a lot for brainstorming, and we use different models.
Yeah.
And one of the things we found, and one needs to remember that AI is built on consensus modeling. So it ignores the outliers. And it is the human element that creates the outliers that are very often the gaps that most people would miss.
Yeah.
That is, at this stage, a very human thing. Now, whether we do progress quickly to general artificial intelligence, which is what's on the table, and then we're talking about synthetic intelligence, which is really a mimic of the human condition. We're not there yet. We may get there, but where we are at the moment, I think my closing here, and I'll hand over to you for your final thoughts.
Sure.
But for heaven's sake, don't undervalue the people that are in your circle, and find a mirror. Find someone like Frencel, even if it's not Frencel, to hold the mirror to you as a founder at these inflection points. And as technology speeds up, not just change, but the rate of change, and we move exponential, you will reach these inflection points faster. You want someone to be there and say, my comrade, my collaborator, what do you think? Be honest.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thanks, Michael. So, no, absolutely. I guess it depends on different markets or different people. For example, you find that someone like Steve Jobs had a business coach. And if you look at the coach, you would probably not quite make the connection. How did he actually decide on this particular coach? Because you might take the view that, here's a guy who was an absolute genius, and he was so technologically savvy. He foresaw the future, but still he had a coach. So I think the idea is that we all have blind spots, and I would also venture to say that with AI and with technology, the pressure, like I said before, on leaders are even more intense. And how do you let go of that pressure? How do you find, let's say, an hour and a half to talk, just to have a chat? And that chat might be, my marketing strategy. It might be this new leader that I brought on. I'm not sure how he's doing. It might be, look, this partnership, I'm not sure where it's going. My cash flow is a bit under pressure. Whatever it might be. Or it might be, look, this is starting to have impact on my personal life. How do I see this? I'm struggling to sleep because I just can't cope. So that's what coaching is not strictly about, strategy setting and, let's look at the margins and so on. It's really about one human talking to another human, and that discussion might end up just in that conversation just being about the personal side. It might not even be about business. And the next conversation, it might just be about, the fact that our debtors are a little bit stretched. And that's all we talk about. So I'm not sure how you get that with AI, because, it's situational, right? It's sort of what's happening at that moment. You might have an overall idea that, look, we want to grow revenue by yeah, I don't know, 50% over the next 3 years, and that might be the outlier goal that you have. You know, we want to improve profitability and we want to uplift in value. That might be the overall goal, but it's not a how can I put it, a report card situation where we get into a session and say, look, let's look at the report card and see, you know, so you will have overall framework, but the idea with the coaching is that it's just one human connecting with another in a business context. And that conversation might be just about personal issue, it might be just about business, it might just be about the external environment and so on. I think for some reason, and I know you've got a lot of experience in this, in terms of you working with entrepreneurs, my sense is that there seems to be a mental kind of blockage where people think that having a coach somehow, it's like when someone says, look, you know, I need to go and see a therapist. There's nothing wrong necessarily with the person. Maybe they're just working through some issues. And I'm not saying a coach is a therapist, but I'm just saying there seems to be a stigma to having a coach. And if you look at it internationally, it seems to be a norm. You know, the best leaders have coaches. Steve Jobs had a coach. And so I hope that, you know, particularly in emerging markets, that paradigm is shifted, um, because I think you can unlock a lot of value, and also just find the space to. I found it when I was in corporate. You know, I looked forward to the time I had with the coach, the executive coach, because it was a space where I could just, you know, kind of declutter, get new perspective, re-energized, and also challenged. Um, So I hope that you know that you know dynamic changes in the market where people are more open to it, and understand that the coach is not necessarily the person with all the answers. I guess that's the other I think mental block as well, is that the perception is that the coach is going to come and tell you what to do. And you know, I've already built my business; it's already got 100 million turnover. So who is he to tell me what to do? So I think that those kinds of you know thinking patterns doesn't really help you, because I found personally, you know, in coaching a few things that during the coaching session, your mind is so occupied because the coach is asking you questions, and so you really, you know, kind of um, get into yourself and think deeply. And what I found is that after the session, I got a lot of answers. So in other words, because the prompting during coaching, after the session, a lot of answers came, a lot of new direction came. And I think that's the invitation, and I hope people take up the invitation, not necessarily with me only, but with coaching, because we want to grow businesses, we want to grow valuable businesses. We want to grow as leaders. We want to become more resilient. But you know, you've spoken a lot in this conversation about how dynamic things are, and the only response we can have is to become more resilient.
And I'm going to say, Frencel, on that note, I have nothing further to say. This has been another great exploration. Thank you. I look forward to getting through all of the at some
Yeah.
stage, but I think that this adds value. I'll remind the audience that the Growth Illusion is available on Amazon for purchase. It's a hefty book. It is what I've read. I don't have my copy yet. It went online yesterday, if I remember correctly. There will be a link to the Amazon website for the book, with the show notes, and look forward to our next discussion.
Thanks so much, Michael. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the next conversation.